Okay, hello, good morning. Thank you for being here. We are starting this a little bit late. We are starting this fourth edition of ECO-SOS Doctorials. As you know, this is an activity that we have designed in order to foster training of PhD students. And the idea is that this may offer you a nice opportunity to present your research in a nice environment, and also to help you to understand different strategies in order to get effective presentations. So let me tell you very quickly which is the program for today. Today we will start with 3 short presentations, which means to provide an overview, an idea of a chapter of your thesis or a general overview of your thesis. Then we will have 4 standard paper presentations in which you will have a standard time in order to present a full chapter of your thesis. And finally, we will have 1 senior presentation by a senior researcher. So we have 3 short papers, 4 standard papers, plus 1 paper by a senior member of the research center. And that's all. We will have a short break around 10:30, more or less. And we will continue. The idea is to finish before 12:30. Okay? So it's a very short and direct event, so try to be as precise and as direct as possible. So thank you very much. So let us start with the first short presentation by Amarildi Tumori. Amarildi has changed the topic of his presentation, so he will tell us which is the new one.
Okay, so good morning everyone. Thank you for being here. I'm Amarildi Tumori, and today I'm going to make a short presentation of my first idea that I'm doing. As Professor Jose Maria said, we decided with my supervisors to change the topic because in this topic we are more advanced. So this is the title of the topic, Tourism Resiliency in the Provinces of Spain. I'm working on this topic with my 2 supervisors, Professor Jose Manuel Jimenez Gomez and Professor Alejandro Perez de Aborda. This is the structure of my short presentation for today. I'm going to talk a little bit for the motivation, the literature review, research questions, and some of the data I have until now. The motivation, of course, we are living here in Spain, and we know that the tourism industry has an importance in this country, and also this means a lot for this country in all aspects, but especially in economic aspect, because tourism industry takes 14.3% of Spain's GDP. Another motivation is COVID-19. The pandemic affected in tourism industry and all destinations. Tourism were shocked after the restrictions and the lockdown. They were not allowed to travel everywhere, so they decided to find new types of tourism. So one of them was camping tourism. So in this type of tourism, according to the pandemic rules, they feel more safer in camping tourism. So as I was reading in some articles, in Spain, camping tourism has increased by 15% since 2018 until nowadays. Related with the literature review, I put just 3 papers that are more related with my idea, but our idea is going to be different because we decided to to make an analysis of provinces in Spain, in hotels and in campings, tourism. So we are going to we took data from 2019 to 2021. So the idea is to see how was the hotel and camping tourism before COVID, how was in the year of COVID, and what happened before, after the COVID. So we took data from July to October because we thought it's like seasonality in both tourisms. So yeah, these are two research questions. The first one, what explains the difference of camping resilience and hotel resilience across provinces in Spain? And the second one, which is the distribution of camping resilience across provinces in Spain? With the data we have until now, we can see those two maps, which the first one is related with hotels overnights, and on the right we can see the numbers, the maximum of resilience, the average, and also the minimum. And the second one is related with the resilience overnights of campings, and we can see a big difference between them. And the other one is for travelers in campings and also in hotels. We can see a big difference between them, and also we can see that camping tourism is coming a new trend in types of tourism, so it's going to be something new, and the numbers are increasing every year. So yeah, until today, this is it, because that's it, because it's just a short presentation, an idea, and yeah, thank you very much for being here. For any suggestion or question, you're welcome to do it. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much. Maria, any comments, questions? I have a couple of comments, questions. The first one is how to measure camping resilience, and whether it should be measured in a different way than hotel resilience, or in general terms, in a different way than any kind of enterprise resilience. So whether there is some kind of specificity to be used for the specific case of camping.
Yeah, the first problem of this camping tourism here is it was, comparing with hotel tourism, it was a big difference, because hotels we can find in every province of Spain, but campings there are only in 22 provinces. So we decided to take all this data from INE. So we took data from 2019, 2020, and 2021. So how I found the resilience, I divided the data from 2020 to 2019. So it's a number that, because we decided to do like this to see, because in 2020 it was COVID, and we took the 2019 as the first year. So we divided by 2020 to 2019, and by 2021 to 2019.
So at the end, it's like a measure of survival. So we are comparing the ones who are now related to the ones who were before the pandemic. Yeah, but in that way, perhaps we are considering these enterprises as a whole, and whether, for instance, some of them have been considerably reducing their activities or lowering their size. So just considering number of campings, you are not taking that into account. And also, you also mentioned the spatial dimension. I think this is important, because the business model of campings is not the same at the seaside, at inland. So you should control for all these issues.
Yeah, we decided to take data in province level, but if we don't find the results that we are waiting, we are going to take data from puntos turísticos. So it could be, I think it would be more easier to find the results there.
I may suggest to add a different dimension, because rather than provinces, because when you talk about provinces, you're considering them as homogeneous entities. But when dealing with campings industry, so the ones at the CSI have nothing to do to the ones at the inland. So perhaps this kind of, their business model is also different, and also the season is not, if you consider the season during the whole year, is not exactly the same. So perhaps they behave in a different way because they are targeting different clients and they are doing different activities. So then the resilience could be dependent on this profile of business. So I may introduce this, let's say, geographical and business dimensions mainly in order to get different profiles, because I guess that resilience may differ according, this is just an intuition, may differ according to profiles of companies. Okay, thank you. Any other comments from here? From online? No? Okay, so thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you.
The second presenter is Josep Tomàs, who is online, so let me... Hello, Josep. Let me... You may share your presentation. Okay, thank you. You have 7-8 minutes. We cannot hear you, Josep. We cannot hear you. Could you say something, please?
It's reacting. Yeah, it's a problem of it's reacting the screen. Therefore, it's a problem of the.
Yeah, so perhaps it's our fault. Just 1 second. Yeah. 1 second, Josep.
Yeah, Windows audio is muted.
Yeah, but I should be. Let me check, but we have a problem of echo. And now, Josep?
Hola.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, good morning, everyone. I'm sorry I'm not being able to present on site, but I'm quite far away right now. And I'm here to present the first draft of the first chapter of my thesis, which is called an Empirical Analysis of the Effects of Sporting on Innovative Status Variability. So what is the topic about? We are well aware that there is a lot of literature analyzing how export dynamics and innovations interact. But we consider that there is a gap in the literature which does not analyze extensively what is the role that exporting plays on the determination of innovation persistence. And we're interested on analyzing different dimensions of trade that I will explain later. And this is not only the main novelty of our research. We are interested in status variability, not in the classical approach to persistence, which has some methodological implications. What does it mean, status variability? We are considering one innovator that in the next period stops innovating of the counterfactual, and an innovator that in the next period will start innovating, and so on. We used the PTEC database, Panel de Innovación Tecnológica, and we found several outcomes that are relevant. First of all is that experience matters, and firms which have more consecutive years exporting are more persistent and less volatile. But not all experience. Firms which are only exporting to the European Union are statistically less persistent than non-exporters, and the ones that are exporting more broadly are significantly more efficient innovators and more persistent. So which are the theoretical foundations of our paper? First, the success with success approach. Firms which were successful in the past will be in the future most likely. The sunk cost theory, that if you make one inversion, this will determine your actions in the future. and the evolutionary perspective, progress is the result of failures and successes in the field of innovation and so on. And we have some empirical also justifications for persistence. We may differentiate between true state persistence and spurious. True persistence is related only with the fact of innovating in last periods, which will increase the likelihood of innovating in the next ones. And spurious state dependence only relate to the characteristics of the company or the sector and the country, so on. This spurious state dependence may depend on internal and external factors, internal to the company or external to the company. A lot of literature on that. And on the other hand, we have the notion of self-selection. The companies which end up exporting and being successful exporters are on first step of the trade process, the most efficient ones. This may be related to innovation, most likely, and then we have the learning by exporting. When a company starts exporting, it enters new dynamics that probably will make it a better exporter. We have distinct dimensions of learning by exporting that are the ones in which we're interested. This is the temporal dimension of trade. For how long have you been an exporter? And the spatial dimension of trade, to how many markets do you export, where are they? Despite that, for our sample, we don't have that disaggregated information. And our objective is to mix the learning by exporter with the literature on persistency. So we have the PTEC database, very quickly, 12 years that we consider, 5,000 firms in at least participating in 10 successive projects. We already consider manufacturing and service sector, so in total we have 62,000 film-year observations. We have two analyses. First, multinomial, we differentiated between persistent innovators or investors in internal R&D, persistent not investors, firms that experience several changes of status, firms transitioning to start investing, or firms transitioning to stop investing, or innovating in the other case. We see how the 1/3 of the sample is persistent in all periods. And a huge difference between R&D and innovation is that persistently non-investors are significantly higher than persistently non-innovators. The rest of the shares are more or less similar. How many events do we observe in the sample? We have 4 possibilities: events of undertaking innovation, considering that previously the firm was not investing in R&D. The same for stopping R&D, innovation, and stopping introducing innovation. All the changes are considered to and must be persistent from T-2 to T to give some consistency to analysis. And we see that the most common event is undertaking R&D or innovation. We used for the categories a multinomial approach. We'll go very quickly on that, and for the probabilistic approach to see which is the likelihood of an event to happen, a random effects probability approach, and which are the results. I will start with the multinomial logic, and here we see that firms exporting only to the EU are significantly less persistent, not only than the other exporters, but compared to firms non-exporting. But on the other hand, they are more likely to transition to start investing in R&D. For firms exporting only outside the EU, we see that they are more likely to be non-persistent investors and more likely to transition more strongly to invest, but also to stop investing. And exporters which are trading inside and outside the EU are more innovators in all case. We see that they are more persistent. We also see that there are a lot of firms which are more persistent innovators and a lot of firms which are transitioning to invest. The number of consecutive years exporting in this case is very significant for the persistent innovators. For the introduction of innovation, we see more or less the same results. There is no significant association between persistent innovators and firms exporting only to the EU. and we see that exporting inside and outside the EU has a strong relationship. With the random effects, we had to separate the number of the temporal learning by exporting and especially because we had some statistical issues, but the results explain themselves very good. We see, in this case, with the event of stopping innovation activities, firms with more experience are less likely to stop investing in R&D, and also firms exporting again to the EU they don't have a significant relationship with that. And we see that broader exporters are less likely to stop innovation activities, or the activities. The same for the event. For the event of introducing innovations, and then the counterfactual random effects for undertaking innovations. We see that firms exporting outside the EU are more likely to start investing in R&D. Then there is a mistake here, probably. Yeah, there is a mistake in this table. No, sorry. No, it's right. And the number of consecutive years exporting, which went against our hypothesis. That's the reason why I got confused. We considered in our hypothesis that the number of consecutive years exporting would increase the likelihood of firms undertaking innovation activities, but we see in the sample that this is not true. Firms with more experience and the ones that were not investing or innovating, they are not going to be so in the future. And we have a reason for that. If you are successful doing one thing, probably it's not very complicated, but if you're successful, you will keep doing that. That's it, main conclusions of our results. I'm outside of the time now. We see that there are significant differences between non-exporters and exporters, but we have a lot of literature on that. The main outcomes is that the temporal dimensions favors persistency in all cases for non-innovators and innovators, but not all experience, and we saw that firms exporting only to the EU, which have more facilities to trade, which have a legal and also geographical environment which favors trade, are going to be less persistent innovators than the ones that must go to foreign markets, more competitive markets, and that have to invest more resources in that. But we have some limitations on the research. We cannot distinguish to which countries the firm export. We don't know if the foreign exporter is exporting to the EU or to South Africa, for instance. We also lack disaggregated information about firms, about characteristics of the firm related to innovation. And in our analysis, we do not differentiate between manufacturing and trade. It was a robustness check, but I don't have time to explain it now. And we define one policy implication that policymakers should encourage not only exporting to the EU markets with that effort. And the important idea is that companies and policymakers should encourage broader trade ventures in order to foster competitiveness and a richer and innovative environment. That's it. If you have questions.
Okay, thank you very much, José. Any comment, questions? Carlos?
Yeah. Hello. Yeah. My question is that resources refer to those who only export to EU or only export to other markets. In your sample, there are firms, or there is a several amount of firms that make a transition in this sense, because I would expect firms to start exporting to the EU as it's easier from an institutional point of view, and afterwards maybe transitioning to broadening the scope of exporting. No? Therefore, how about firms that might change the status or the exporting status? I mean, I don't know if this makes sense or has any impact in your analysis.
No, that's not right. In our database, we had several information about exporters, 3 dimensions, the quantity, the volume of exports by total share of profits. Then we had, we built this indicator, but we had information related with for how long has been the company exporting. Related to your question about the persistency of exporting, we consider the number of consecutive years exporting. If the firm stops exporting, this is broken, so it doesn't count for our analysis. And third, the spatial dimensions, we had a categorical variable which indicates, does the company export to the EU? Does the company export outside the EU? Does the company export to both? And we use that. We don't have more information about that. We use what we had in the database. If I answered your question properly.
Yeah. Right.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions? Asier?
Hey, Josep, can you hear me?
Sí, sí.
Okay, so I think it would be nice to start your motivation with a transition matrix. Like, what's the probability that given that today you have status X, next period you have status Y? Because, I mean, you have these bars that are unconditional on your current status, but your paper is about changes in status, no? So I think it would be nice to have like a matrix there as motivation for, look, this is a widespread phenomenon. We see that these changes are more frequent than these other changes, and we understand these changes because, you know, they're prevalent, they're relevant for this reason and that reason, and so on. So just that's the issue.
Presented in the paper, but for the sake of being fast, I didn't know. I have an echo here. So yeah, you're completely right.
If you can repeat your answer to that, we haven't heard you.
We have the transition matrix in the paper, and yeah, you're completely right that it's good to present it, but for sake of being fast now, I did not present it, but yeah.
Okay, thank you. And a very just not a, because we are out of time, not a question, just a comment to be taken into account, which is the definition of persistence, and whether you may use alternative definition of persistence, because that may bias, may modify your results. You don't need to answer now, just to take that into account in order to think about whether the literature has provided alternative definitions in this sense. Okay? So, thank you. Thank you very much to Josep. And let's move to the third short presentation. In fact, the last short presentation by Lucio Ojeda. It's here.
Hello, my name is Ojeda. I'm beginning my PhD second year. So I'm going to present my research proposal. I'm researching corporate social accounting and its contribution to gender equality in Spain. First, I must clarify what social accounting is. Corporate social accounting, also known as non-financial report, sustainability reporting, or corporate social report, among others, is the process of communicating the environmental and social results or effects of the economic actions of organizations to particular interest groups and society in general. Well, and what is the relationship with gender? Well, first, gender equality and the empowerment of women and girls is not only a specific aim to the sustainability development goals. Also, it's a cross-cutting axis of all the other goals in the 2030 agenda. Yes, and involving the companies in the process to achieve the social development goals helps makes that happen. Well, because it's attacks not only of the public establishment, it's attacks of all of us. In turn, the companies could accomplish the regulatory compliance on gender equality in the workplace and have a discrimination-free workplace according to the international, European, and national regulations. Therefore, the research general objective is analyze the contribution of corporate social accounting to gender equality in Spain. I have specific objectives. The first one is identify the state of the art on gender in corporate social accounting through a systematic literature review. The second one is examine the corporate social responsibility reports in Spain with respect to gender equality. And the third one is determine if feminized companies in Spain report more about gender than their partners. Well, for the first one, it's a systematic literature review. I use keywords related with social accounting and gender to the Scopus, a Web of Science database. To find papers' main objective is analyzes the company's reports about their activities against gender inequality. Well, the highlights of the partial results is that the most of the documents found use qualitative method, mostly content analysis, or some of them use mixed methods, combining statistical analysis of standards such as global reporting initiative with the content of the report. In turn, well, the measures to promote, also the measures to promote gender equality in companies are still incipient, even if the country signed international treatments, and the reports contain poor information that is difficult to verify. Well, for the second one, I'm going to use the content analysis method supported by fuzzy logic using a scikit fuzzy Python package. My sample is going to be the 30 Spanish companies with the highest income in 2021. I did a draft with the first 5 companies, and I used the Global Reporting Initiative standard to evaluate the reporting of each company. I obtained, well, the first 5 companies obtained good results, especially in representation and leadership. But I should improve my study. Well, it was a draft, but I should improve extending the evaluation criteria to other standards, regulations, and feminist theory. For the third one, I will probably use the content analysis. I will use the same sample, the third Spanish company with the highest income in 2021, but in this case I will group by feminized, masculinized, or balanced representation. My hypothesis is that the companies with large number of women as employees, I mean feminized companies, publish more about gender than their partners. Thanks.
Any comments, questions? Carlos?
Okay. Some really short questions. The fact that your data is from 2021, could it be still affected by COVID? I mean, that's one of the questions. The second one is, which is the threshold, I guess, in percentage that you use to define companies as feminized or masculinized, and whether the establishment of this threshold could affect your results. And the third one is, with respect to your hypothesis, maybe it's not just or specifically the whole staff, but maybe what marks the difference is in the decision making, like in the top of the firm, no? Like the weights in the top of the firm as an additional, I don't know, maybe it could be interesting to look at that, I don't know.
Yes, well, the first question, I will use 2021 because in the systematic literature review, the studies that are for other studies like this, there are no results. It's like, well, 5 companies report or publish about gender, but it's not, yes, there are not big results. The companies didn't publish it, yes. It's not a big data about that. But now, after COVID, it's more, well, the companies are interested in publish that. So it's, for the 2021, I think it's a good year. But I have to review that, yes. And for the feminized, yes, it's unclear, but the representation, it's, I think it's, maybe I could study only the representation in leadership, but I don't know yet. Yes, it's only an idea, I don't know. Yeah.
No, you need to wait a little bit.
Okay, am I audible? Yeah. Okay, so I wanted to understand what we are trying to imply by publishing, like your hypothesis, when a company publishes more papers about gender. Because I have like a personal anecdote. I worked with an organization who worked on, like they published paper on workforce well-being, while they themselves were not, accustomed to caring about the well-being of their workforce. So, with that, like, can we establish in some manner that publishing more papers about gender implies that the organization or the company that is publishing about genders care more about genders in reality, instead of just publishing more papers? Haven't made myself clear. Exactly, right.
Well, sorry, my English is not very good. But for that, in my second paper, I think I can separate reporting and good results. Because big companies publish about gender, about representation and leadership, like 20% of our power positions are women, yeah. But 20% is enough, it's a good result. So they publish, it's good, they publish. But it's a good result, it's other thing that we have to analyze too.
Just a comment. So again, a personal anecdote. The organization that I worked with was like 90% women, but a lot of times companies employ more women because they can exploit them more.
Mm-hmm.
So that is also a case. So just something that you can keep as a caveat and keep in mind while doing your research. So every company that employs more women doesn't imply that they are working towards gender equality. It also implies that they will have to pay less to women, right? Because men generally demand more money. If you tell a woman that, oh no, we are not going to give you this much money, only like say what you asked for, like 70% of it, because women really want to work and a lot of times they are not given opportunities, they will accept that 70%. While men will be like, oh no, if you're not going to give me that money, I'm going to go and get another work. So women also get work where they can be exploited, So just because more women are employed, that doesn't imply that there is gender equality per se.
Okay, for that, the representation and leadership is not the only criteria, yes? To evaluate, I use GRI standard, that it's a simple way to evaluate. But there are others. I have to extend my evaluation to the regulation and fairness theory for view that those points like paid, like hours, flexibility, schedule, all the other things, right?
Okay, thank you very much. There is a very good point, and also the comment by Carlos. So I may suggest you to go deeper into this identification of feminized companies, because if not only the distribution of gender, or I'm talking about the whole employees, is about what happens inside the board. So whether the board of the company, because we are dealing with big companies, so you should have information about gender distribution inside the board, and so that makes a difference to take into account the different measures of feminization inside firms. And also be careful, because if we are dealing only with big companies, you may get some bias in your results, because perhaps the situation is not exactly the same as the one of small and medium enterprises in terms of this priorities about gender. Okay. And there is a final, very short question by Asian.
Also, I don't know the content analysis method, so it seems to me that if you only use a cross section, then it could be just a company fixed effect for whatever reason it has some particular culture or whatever that's associated to some other regressors. Whereas if you use some panel data, then you'll be able to isolate the company-specific component from other observables that might be actually more related to. You see what I mean? You can clean the company fixed effect if you have a panel, whereas if you only have a cross-section, you cannot do that.
A panel data. Well, yeah. Maybe it will be, for the second objective, I did a draft with fuzzy logic, but it's not, I'm not sure it's the best way, yes? And binary data would be a good method too. Yes. Thanks.
Okay, thank you very much, Lucy. So now we have finished the three short presentation. We are moving to the four standard ones. The first one is by Nadima Hassan. You have around 17-18 minutes in order to have time for questions.
Good morning, everyone. For those who don't know me, my name is Nadima Hassan. I'm right now studying my second year of PhD in the area of business administration. For me, thank you very much for having here today. And for me, it's a pleasure to introduce or talk about the location of HR decision in multi-site companies. Nowadays, organizations live in an unstable, complex, and competitive environment with a lot of change. For that reason, we need a flexible structure with elastic and operation models, and also with shared responsibility. In this context, two processes that have become important are devolution and decentralization. This process has been studied in the human resource literature separately. They have received a lot of attention. However, they are different, and we are interested to know the role of line manager in HR decentralization process. In particular, there is a lack about thank you. Little is known about how these processes are. There are confusion in the literature about both, and also we are interested to know how they are related. Also, under what circumstances, decentralization is more or less likely to increase devolution. The reason for we think that is because we found in the literature several papers who talk, for example, about devolution or decentralization as the same concept, refers to centralization as a process that includes devolution. Also,
excuse me, Nadima, could you please very briefly define devolution and decentralization?
Yes,
to get a clear picture about.
Yes, for sure. It's my first objective of the paper. I will clarify after this. Thank you. Maybe it will be good for the future. It's the almost first time that I present this work. Maybe in the future I begin with the concept. I need to thinking about that. Later you can give me some advice. Well, also they think that analyze devolution, however, study decentralization, and we find some language limitation. For that reason, our aim goal is to clarify the difference between HR decentralization and devolution, and also we are interested to explore how they are related. Well, decentralization is about the where HR decisions are made. For example, in the headquarters or at the local unit. For example, if we think in Google company, the headquarters is located in California, United States. And if this company made HR decision there, the company is centralized, no? It's a centralized company. However, is the subsidiary making HR decision, which are many located around the world, the company is decentralized. There are decentralization. This concept is embedded in the multinational literature, and more recently in shared HR service. But the root, the origin came from organizational design. Centralization talk about integration, it relate about control, alignment with the strategy of organization, and decentralization is related with flexibility, adaptation, speed in decision making. So, then, what is devolution? Well, devolution is related with the who. Who takes human resource responsibility? Who decide for HR practice? Commonly, they are HR department or line manager. Yes, it's the difference. One speak about the where and the other about the who. There are many concepts in the literature, but all of them talk around one central idea, the transfer of HR responsibility from HR department to line manager. This literature talk about that line manager play a non-trivial role in HRM. Also, one important key to understand is devolution is an area who is good to going by its own or combined with devolution, with decentralization, is to note the benefits and costs of devolution. For example, if we transfer the decision to line manager, we get faster HR decision because they are in contact with employees face to face. In most of the case, understand their individual needs, better adaptation to local environments. HR practitioners have more time to dedicate to more strategic issues, and also is likely to save costs. And some disadvantages of devolution could be poor quality in the implementation of HR policy, because sometimes line managers don't have all knowledge of HR knowledge. Also, they can have lack motivation or a skill to carry out those tasks. But we can implement some key driver of success of devolution. For example, the training, the support from HR department to develop the necessary HR abilities. Well, we talk about both concepts are different. However, they have the similar proposal, no? The HR efficiency, the agility. So, what is the relationship between them? There are a theory from Born and Stoker who link the uncertainty with the structure of the company. They said that in high uncertainty, operation needs to rely on the initiative of employees who view their role more broadly. This corresponding to our organic structure. Opposite, in low uncertainty, it is easier to routinize operations in rule with more specialized and defined role, which corresponding with mechanistic structure. So, if one company wants to respond to the uncertainty, they are more available to transfer the HR decision from headquarters to the unit, to the subsidiary. And also, transferring the HR decision from a high-ranking manager to a low-ranking manager, which corresponding with the who. Also, the international HR literature talk about the similar focus. There are a lot of papers who talk about while the more complex is the environment, the more decentralization. For that reason, we argue that in higher level of HR, decentralization will be associated with higher levels of devolution to line manager. Our second goal, as I just said, decentralization is about the where, who takes, where takes responsibility for HR, and can be decentralization through line managers. No, just said that my hypothesis. But what happened with HR departments? Which actors are the most appropriate to make HR decision? Maybe we can think about the complex of HR practice or specialized. You know, they can manage if more or less likely to deliver to the expert, which are the HR departments. Also, there are one theory about the perception of substitutability, which are the idea that the HR department is not a specialized activity. The other stakeholder of the organization maybe can think that they can do the HR practice because don't see the importance or the specialized of the activity of HR. So if there are devolution, the perception of substitutability increased for HR department, and then they want to retain his power and not transfer to line manager. And powerful HR department may find it more natural to choose their own HR professional on the ground rather than passing to the line. For that reason, we said that HR power will negatively moderate the relationship between decentralization and devolution of HR. So that this association will be weaker for high levels of HR power. We test our hypothesis from a survey, a current survey. It's a it's a survey from an international project, which is the GRANET, and we count with 4,052 organizations representative in 35 countries. We removed for our data, organization less than 100 employees because probably a small organization don't have HR department or don't have a strong in the policy of HR. Also, we remove organization with only one site for the implementation of decentralization, of course. Then we build in some variables for our study, which are devolution, decentralization, HR, and some control variables. For example, devolution. We take in the survey, we ask who bears the primary responsibility in 5 HR practice, and they must to answer only the HR department or HR depart in consultation with the line manager, or only the line manager, then we building this variable, also similar with decentralization. And HR power, we thinking if the person who has the responsibility to make this HR decision had a set on the board, is a company with HR power, also where the organization has the business strategy, in HR is involved from the outset, and whether the performance of the personal human resource department is evaluated. With this characteristic, we're building these variables. And we test multi-level analysis because our data is are hierarchically, sorry, and we building two levels. Level 1 organization, who is embedded in its country, which corresponding to level 2. And we run the analysis in SPSS, and in the screen they show the results of our multi-level analysis. We can see that there are a significant and positive relationship between devolution and decentralization, who mean that is, if there are a company which has autonomy, which is decentralized, there are more likely to transferring the power of HR to the line manager. There are a positive relationship. Thank you. And the variable, the moderated variable of HR power influence negatively in this relationship. So there are a lot of implications for our research. For example, one of them is for HR manager, it's important to understand that these are different even if related. There's two decisions that need to be made. Decision about decentralization and decision about devolution. Also, we know that our research has some limitation. For example, we did a cross-sectional data, but for sure, a longitudinal study helped us to understand more deeply this topic. Only we take variable at level 1 and others. And the conclusion, we clarify conceptually and operationalize the distinction between both controls. And we found that increasing levels of decentralization lead to increasing levels of devolution, but that this is less likely to happen in organizations when HR department hold more power. Thank you very much.
Many thanks, Edima, for your presentation. I have some comments, questions. Well, the first one I suggested them at the beginning is to perhaps to start by this definition of both ideas, because at the end you are discussing them, and at least I was a little bit lost at the very beginning of your presentation because it was not clear what devolution and decentralization means. But apart from that, some comments. I would suggest to provide, for instance, something like a table of different combination of different decentralization and devolution levels that could help you to identify different profile of firms in terms of whether some firms have low levels of decentralization but high levels of devolution, or intermediate levels of them. So perhaps segmenting them could provide a more clear view. And then another idea that came to my mind is that perhaps, it's only perhaps, you have a lot of ideas here in your paper, because normally in a paper you need only a single idea. If you put more than one idea, then you have more than one paper. And if you have a discussion about concepts and a discussion about relationship between both concepts, perhaps, only perhaps it's too much. And then some final comment, because as you were talking about this relationship between the evolution and decentralization, here it's not clear for me about causality direction. So perhaps you have some kind of endogeneity in your estimation, and you have to discuss that and to take that into account. I understand that you have a yes/no dependent variables, but if you manage to transform this dependent variable or to measure the evolution and decentralization in a different way, I may suggest you to use a two-stage least squares in order to deal with this potential endogeneity between both variables, because the evolution may influence decentralization, but at the same time decentralization may influence evolution, and you don't know a priori which is the more reasonable causality direction between them.
Well, yes, for sure. I would take into account to explain first the concept, first of all, and second, precisely our second paper is about to create a cluster with different ways of four clusters maybe come out from the data with low devolution, with high decentralization, and we want to criticize the different clusters. And the third idea, well, we test multicollinearity test, and we test also a correlation analysis of correlation, and for sure they have a kind of influence, but we can go into the multi-level analysis because. But we can thinking about that. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. Any more? No, not yet. Any more comments, questions from the audience? There. You have to open the.
My comments are not conceptual, but the comments about the presentation, I'm not the expert in HR. I think, as you said, that it will be good to have definitions of the devolution centralization, very clear and short. And also, for me, wasn't clear why it's so important. What's the meaning impact for the company, and what its the meaning of HR power. Maybe I missed the presentation, I don't know, but the definitions for me wasn't clear.
The definition of both concepts wasn't clear. Yes.
Kind of, I don't know.
Yes.
For me, it wasn't clear, maybe.
Yes. Well, the most important is to know that one concept, decentralization, is about the where HR are made, if headquarters or in the units, subsidiaries, and the evolution is about who is in charge of this decision. For sure, both of them can go hand in hand, and we have a organization with decentralization and also with evolution. And maybe from this idea come from the confusion. But it's important to have clear both concepts, because the manager in the company and for the literature need to understand that they are two processes with two different rules. You know, one from one area and the other for other. And the most important is about the where. It's about the decentralization, about the who is the evolution. I don't know if I answered you.
In the end, it's another question of the power. Who has the power?
At the end, if one organization is decentralized, my hypothesis demonstrate that could be more probably that the HR is in hand of line manager. However, is one organization which have a very strong department of HR, they don't want to this happen. They retain this power, and this could be moderate this relationship. For that reason, we test this variable into account of study. For sure, is we have a strong HR department. They want to keep this power to have a status in the organization, to decrease the perception of sustainability and that kind of thing.
A very, very short question by Carlos, because we are out of time.
Yeah, my doubt is if decentralization is defined on the basis of the where, this implies that it needs to be a multinational firm, but your data set was defined as one side. They still are multinationals?
We remove the organization who one side, because we remove organization.
I didn't get it.
Don't worry, we remove organization of our data that have one side because we need to check the decentralization process.
Yeah, in that case, the slide about the data set was confusing because they had the same data, also about the size of. It seemed that you were considering only one establishment firms and only firms below 100 employees.
Well, maybe I changed the apple and said we take organization with more than 100 employees and we take organization with both sides.
That's fine.
Instead of one side. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much. And let's move to the second standard presentation by Mona Mazumi, and the last one before the coffee break.
Hello and good morning. My topic is the influence of sustainability on the customer experience and the intention to spread the word of mouth in sharing economy. And my case study is Airbnb. Sharing economy platforms have been converting so many converting productions and services in all around the world, and they may contribute to addressing the sustainability. However, still the economical, environmental, economical, and social aspects of the sharing economy still is poorly understood. And especially, and moreover, sustainability, promising forms of the sharing in the era of the pandemic and the climate crisis, economic crisis, and connectedness
etc., has been under the attention nowadays. So, definition of the sharing economy. There are so many definitions for sharing economy. First of all, built in 2007 defines the sharing as a substitute to the private ownership in both marketplace and gift giving, and enhances the sharing. Two or more people enjoy the costs and benefits of something apart from if it's mine or yours. Also, according to OECD, sharing economy is a new marketplace that allows services to be provided on peer-to-peer shared usage basis. The European Commission explains the sharing economy as a new business model which consumers pay for the temporary usage of the digital platforms. So, sustainability in sharing economy. There is a constant growing attention among the researchers and policymakers and innovators, entrepreneurs, and etc. Etc. And why there is a considerable interest in sharing economy, it's indicated as a new pathway to sustainability. There are also some argues that says that sharing economy disturbs the unsustainable consumption drives by capitalist economics. There is also the economic aspect of sharing economy is defined as a business model able to decentralize and disrupt the traditional way of doing business, and the social aspect is defined as a pathway to increase the social bonding and connection and collaborations. And the environmental aspect also is defined as a more sustainable consumption. Sharing economy in tourism industry is divided to four subsectors. First is dining, that covers activities such as purchasing home-cooked meals, attending dinners organized by local residents, and then travel planning, which includes itinerary planning and tours by local who offer personal or customized experience. And then we have accommodation, which involves the temporary, the short-time rental of private sector, which is actually my case, and Airbnb with more than with around 2 million properties all around in more than 190 countries, and it forced more than 25 million US dollars. And also we have transportation, which cars such as car sharing and Uber, and the biggest one is Uber, which Uber is operating around 400 cities all around the world and values more than $60 million. So, and then in the accommodation, also we have three business models. First is P2P or peer-to-peer accommodation, which providers charge a rental fee, and either the guest pays it directly to the provider, like homestay, or the fee is paid through the platform such as the Airbnb. And then we have the reciprocal accommodation exchange, which is rental charge free and temporary house exchange through the platform, and only a transaction fee charges for just for the transactions, such as home exchange. And then we have free accommodation. Free accommodation exchange refers to those in which party and another this is like without paying any money. It's actually one of the most important one is the Coursera fee. However, currently when I was checking their website, I saw that it seems since after pandemic they are charging like a small amount of money because of the economic crisis that they are facing, I guess. And here we can see the ecosystem of the accommodation ecosystem. We have we can see that we have the host and guest. The host actually offers the accommodation through the platform, and the guest requests for the accommodation through the platform, and the guest pays the rental fee plus the commission, and the host receives the rental fee minus the commission, and the both sides they can write the reviews, and for the future clients they can use the reviews for decision making. So, and here is my research model, which is based on SOR theory, which is actually psychological theory. And in fact, this theory investigates the customer behavior. In this model, actually a stimulus is as an input, and then we have organism as a process, and we have a response as output. So, but in my model, I choose the sustainability aspects of the sharing economy, and then we have for organism or process, we have emotional value and satisfaction, which emotional value, positive or negative, causes satisfaction or dissatisfaction. And we have a word of mouth or alternative, which is according to their emotional value and their satisfaction. And you can see that we have six hypotheses, which is developed by in my literature review. According to my literature review, first there is a positive relationship between sustainability and customer emotions. Sustainability negatively influences tourist satisfaction, and then there is a direct relationship between emotions and customer satisfaction. And satisfaction positively influence the intention to spread the positive or negative word of mouth, and satisfaction positively influences behavioral intention, and emotions positively influence customer intentional word of mouth or searching for alternative. For methodology to test the hypothesis, I conducted a survey and questionnaire. And I'm going to use the confirmatory factor analysis or CFA technique to verify the factor structure and set of the factor structure of a set of observed variables, and to test the hypothesis and their relationships. And also our software package is going to be used for this purpose. Here is my questionnaire, which according, as you can see, for every aspect of the sustainability, three main indicators are chosen. For example, for social, cultural, I use to social tie, cultural learning, and trust system, and then economic and environmental aspect, and then emotional value and customer satisfaction. Every single one they have some main indicators, and based on the indicator, I make the questions. Here's my primary results. This is actually kind of demographic statistics. And you can see it's actually the response from 439 people, participants, because first of all, I spread the questionnaire among my friends and people who I know. But it was not enough, of course, so I used Amazon Mechanical and Turk website, and so I could collect all of this data. So as you can see, here's the number of the female and male. And you can see that the age, they are mostly young people, that they are between 25 to 34. And the occupation, that most of them are full-time employed, and then we have the education. So here's a summary of it was actually I forgot to say that it was a Likert scale with seven scales, 1 to 7, strongly and disagree, somehow disagree, neither agree nor disagree. Somehow I agree, strongly agree, and as you can see, for the three aspects of the sustainability, most of the people have voted for agree, and also it's had the same trend in emotional value and satisfaction. And here we can see the mean of every single question. As you can see, it's the mean is mostly between 5 to 6 for every single question, which means that most of the people, they were between somehow agree and to agree. And here is also the literature responses from every other question for the block of the questions. And yeah, as you can see, this is not a finished paper. I need to work on to use the structural equation modeling to see all the relationships and all the to test the hypothesis.
Okay, thank you very much, Muna. Any comments, questions from the audience? Mireia, please. Who has the mic?
I can speak that.
Okay. As you prefer. Yeah.
Does it work? Okay. So my question, well, more than a question, is kind of a warning, caution, and so on in terms of publishing from this data, because many journals are having serious doubts about publishing research with data having been collected from Mechanical Turk. So you would need to have some sort of protection around that, whether it's by making sure that, for example, the profile of the people that we have collected data from closely fit the profile of PNB users, for example, or I don't know what sort of guarantees you could provide, but you need to make sure that you give some, you cannot just say, I tried with my friends and then there weren't enough of them and then I went to Mechanical Turk, because just simply on the basis of that, you're going to have a test reject. So, you would be ashamed that your paper is not even considered just in terms of the strength of the
but I didn't put it in my slides, but I asked them if they have ever used I I don't know why I didn't put it in my slides. I asked them that how many times they have used the Airbnb last 5 years. And like even in my question, I saw that there was some answer. They were saying that they have never used, and then I just removed them. So there was more there was more people, but because of this kind of reasons, I removed this people.
Sorry. So yeah, of course, if you have a user representative, of course they are not valid respondents, but you need to go above and beyond that. And so it could be that people who respond in mechanical Turk are not just any people. So there's the element of compensation seeking and so on. So their profile might not match the profile of who would be the profile of Airbnb users. So, but that would be only one aspect. You need to kind of justify well why that's good enough. I mean, it's consumers, yes, it's always easier with consumers than with managers or with other sort of respondents, but even being, quite a generic sort of consumer that we're looking at here, you need to have some sort of, way of checking with it that's, really corresponding to something that if you went and looked. So ideally, let's say that we have infinite access to any respondents, we would directly go to Airbnb and ask, well, who is the profile of your clientele? And then we say, so many employed, unemployed, age, and so on. So you would want at least this sample to resemble that, to have some sort of guarantee, some sort of strength behind that sample.
Thank you for information.
Okay, thank you. There is one question by Asia.
I suppose what I would suggest right now is that you drop the observations that you gathered yourself and you just focus on the sample that comes from Amazon, and the sample then increase it through the same means and sort of forget about the people that you know, because that's a selected sample, right? Those are people you know, and they are probably similar to you or related to you in observables or unobservables, and so you don't want to have that one. Thank you. But good job.
Okay, thank you. So in addition to that, I absolutely agree with these comments, because just looking at your data, it seems that, well, that your friends are very well educated, they are young, but perhaps I don't know whether this is the precise profile of people using the services. So check that. And also, I would suggest to control, to reduce the number of hypotheses, because we have perhaps many of them, and also to identify in a clearer way which is the goal of the paper, because from the very beginning of your presentation I had a different idea about what you were going to talk about, and then at the end I realized that exactly the type of analysis which is quite interesting, but perhaps at the very beginning it seemed a paper about sustainability in general terms, and then you realize that not if it's about a very specific dimension of this kind of sharing economy. And then also to take in mind that obviously you are referring to a very specific activity like this kind of services provided by Airbnb. But the idea that this is more sustainable than traditional tourist services is not clear at all, because there is a lot of literature about complaining or discussing whether there are a lot of negative externalities, because this kind of supply is, let's say, boosting demand, which means additional travels, additional pollution, whatever. So it's not absolutely there is not an absolute agreement about that this is a sustainable activity. Perhaps the activity isolated as an activity, yes, but all the other, let's say, related activities, not at all.
Yeah, but that's why, for example, one of my questions, environmental aspect is CO2 emission, and I asked them that, like, for example, since I'm using Airbnb, I travel more. This actually causes like more CO2 emission. So So I try to take in my account everything. So.
No, yeah, but I mean at the beginning, when we were trying to contextualize the sustainability dimension of these activities, to have in mind all these concepts. Right? That's all. Okay. Additional questions, comments? No, so thank you very much, Mona. So now we have time for a coffee break, but this is only a premium service for the on-site attendance. So those of you who are online, you have two standard papers to be presented by Eric Barbera and Harry Papadakis, and we will finish with a presentation of a senior researcher, in this case by Susana Iranzo. So Eric, the floor is yours. You have 17 minutes more or less, in order to have some time to comment discussions.
Okay. So good morning everyone, my name is Eric Barbera. I'm going to present the first part of my thesis, the analytical review of social well-being composite indices. This is the outline that I'm going to follow. First, I'm going to introduce social well-being. I will continue with the descriptive comparison and empirical analysis of social well-being composite indices. We'll continue with conclusions and finally, next steps in my research. Regarding the introduction, first I want to present my objectives. My first and ultimate objective is to do research on the relationship between social well-being and the economic system, institutions and inequality. For this I need a social well-being metric. It leads to my second objective, which is analysis of existing measures of social well-being to choose one of them for my research. The conclusion of this is I need to create a social well-being composite index. And this is my third of the objectives. But why social well-being is important? Economic growth and trickle-down economics sometimes fail on improving well-being, quality of life of people. In addition, GDP ignores many information such as environmental externalities or social externalities. Then there's the beginning of a paradigm shift, and there's a need on focus on other concepts for beyond GDP, like well-being in the economy or the beyond GDP concept. In addition, some governments and non-governmental organizations have developed new well-being policy frameworks. But what's social well-being? There's not a clear and well-accepted definition, but there are some common traits. For example, well-being is a multidimensional concept, so there are different dimensions of well-being: housing, health, education. Also, well-being is related to the quality of life and social quality theories. The first is more focused on individuals, and the second on the relationships between individuals and societies. And social well-being is a mix of both and all things. I want to highlight this social scope because it's not an economic perspective, or in the health field they also use this well-being concept. And also it's different from other similar concepts such as development, because this is more focused on less developed countries and quality of life, and social well-being is more focused on more developed countries. There have been used different measures to capture social well-being, for example, economic variables like income or consumption per capita, also GDP-based metrics. A good example is the genuine progress indicator. If we take into account distributional considerations, adjusted income is also used. Utility functions are another example. And then there are subjective measures such as happiness or satisfaction and self-evaluation of life. And finally, if we want to take into account the multidimensionality of social well-being, we could follow a social indicators approach. This says that there exist many variables related to people, related to quality of life, to society, that are important. And in the end, what we have to do is to synthesize all of them in a unique composite index. So we know that social well-being is important. We know that the composite index is the best technique to measure social well-being, but there exist many ways to create a social well-being composite index. And there are many questions related to this. Which are the common characteristics of them, what they differ, what they have in common, if there is a best existing social well-being composite index, if it requires designing more and more composite indices, etc.
Just to understand, what do you mean by a composite index is the best technique to measure social well-being? I mean, I would think that good or bad depends on what you're trying to do with it. I mean, what you're trying to ask, what specific question.
Yes.
What to say.
It's what I said. If you want to take into account the multidimensionality of well-being, taking into account only one variable, GDP, income, or whatever, or only happiness, is not a good measure because that's an.
I agree with that, but then whether that can be aggregated into a scalar, which is an index, is debatable, right? And there's choice theory that will tell you that whether you can aggregate that into one number or not may depend on underlying aspects of choice. So it's the best. It's a very absolute statement.
Well, then I could say that it's the best if we want to take into account all the dimensions that it have. Okay, of course, all of these are different approaches, and they are valid depending on the objective that you have. But if we want to take all of information or as much information as you can related to the social well-being, then for sure you have to take into account the different variables.
Yeah, what I'm disputing is the fact that you can aggregate all of those into one index. But anyway, let's continue this conversation.
Okay, we will see. Okay, finish this, yes. Okay, so in order to answer these questions, I analyzed the collection of social well-being indices, and the first part is the descriptive comparison, and I will continue with the analytical part. To do this part, I have to mention some selection criteria. I just consider composite indices, so at least two variables must be considered. Also, at least half percent of these indicators must be social. The third criteria is that objectivity is required and subjectivity is optional. I will talk about it later on. Then indices must be country-based and international. They must consider all countries' population, for example, not a collective like women or young people or old people, not all of them. And finally, transparency of information and availability of data is also a requirement. Okay, this is a very, I don't know if you can appreciate it, but there's a list of 20 indices. There are many non-governmental institutions as the World Bank or the OCDE, and also some come from the academia, different years of reference and frequencies, a number of countries. The first was published in 1978, the last one in 2020, and regarding the purpose, more or less, all of them, I'll talk about social well-being, quality of life, etc. But there are different nuances. Some are more focused on sustainability, other more to the economical part of well-being, etc. So we can follow different conceptual approaches. The first one is the selection method. It means how decisions are taken. Top-down selection method consistent decisions are based on authors and experts' knowledge. 19 of the 20 follow this approach. An alternative would be a bottom-up. It means that decisions depend on people's considerations. And there's only one index, the Better Life Index by the OCDE, that follows a blend between both. On one hand, domains and indicators are selected by the organization, but on the other, citizens can choose on the website the weight of each domain, so each person can create its own social well-being and Better Life Index. Okay, subjectivity. As I said, one criteria was that at least objectivity is required. It's because there's a consensus that both subjective and objective information is important and they are complementary, but subjective information presents some weakness, especially for comparability, because of individualism, and also if we want to compare different societies, cultural and traditional differences could affect also this comparability. Another approach that is also really important to assess well-being is the distinction between outcomes and instruments. Okay, on one hand, we can, for example, in the field of health, we can consider how much money is spent on health, the number of doctors, the number of beds, but at the end, these are just instruments to improve the well-being. And what matters is the quality, the life expectancy, the illnesses, etc. So at the end, all the instruments related to policies, to economics, to preventive indicators are just determinants and not components of well-being. But the thing is that this is clear on literature, but when authors create indices, they mix everything together. There's, for example, the need approach that is inside the outcomes approach that follows the idea that only basic needs is important, and also a Marta Sen's a capabilities approach that he talks about capabilities, functions, achievements of people. He also highlights this idea that only the results are important and not the means, the instruments. Taking it into account, there's a debate if economic variables should be considered or not. Because at the end, a wage, for example, is a mean to achieve well-being. Money is not well-being by itself, but it's what you can do with money, okay? But 70% of the analyzed indices, 75, cover some type of economic data. And in fact, 4 of them, the economic dimension is a main theoretical part of the index. Then another approach is the sustainability, if we consider sustainability or not. The thing is that we know that sustainability is important, but the relationship between sustainability and social well-being is the first and complex, because there are mutual positive and trade-offs. So at the end, a synthetic assessment that puts together these both phenomena could have difficult interpretation. And it's better to think that there are different targets and they are assessed separately. In this case, there's one index that follows these suggestions and consider like a 3-bottom sustainability index with economical, environmental, and social, but they are not synthesized in a unique index, but there are 3 parts. There are 8 of the index that they do not consider environmental variables. Okay, now we can go to the methodical decisions. Here we can see some hit tables to see them more used. In terms of normalization method, we need that variables are with the same unit in order to aggregate them, and most of the indices follow a min-max formula. It has some advantages. There's easy interpretation, also easy comparability among components, and there are no negative scores. But on the other hand, there's a shortcoming, and it's that outlier. Outlier is a country that, for example, has a value very different from the rest of countries, could have a distortion effect. In order to address this problem, what many indices do is to complement with other techniques like definition of boundaries, logarithmic transformation, or clipping. And there's one index that uses the distance to a reference country method, and in this case, the reference country is the United States of America. If we go to the aggregation method, it means that components must be aggregated to the synthetic index. Most of them follow an additive or linear approach, but the problem of this is that there are compensatory or substitutability effect. It means that maybe positive results in health can compensate bad results in education. It's just something conceptual that the author can agree or not. If the author wants to mitigate this effect, geometric method can be used. If we want to avoid this problem, multi-criteria decision making is used, in this case for 2 of the indices. Also weighting method, it means the contribution that each component has in the whole index is important. In this case, there are 2 different stages. The first is that the variables, indicators, are added in a domain of well-being, and then domains are added inside the index, the synthetic index. Well, in both stages, the most common method is equal weights. Okay, so all the components have the same contribution to well-being. But these, together with the democratic weights, which is the one that I explained about the Better Life Index, that citizens can choose the weights, had some problems because they suffer from subjectivity, and also the double counting problem. It means that maybe some information is counted twice, so there's a redundant information in the index. In order to address this, there are some data-driven methods, for example, the principal component analysis or the factor analysis, but some authors also highlight some problematics of this method. So at the end, there are some pros and cons that each author can choose. And I want to say that most or some of the indices just apply the same method, but it would be interesting to apply different methods, because in my opinion, in the first stage, it's interesting to take into account this double counting problem. So some interesting technique could be used without introducing new problems, but it's difficult to conceptually justify that some domains of well-being are more important than others. Saying, for example, that housing is more important than health, or security is more important than education, it's difficult to justify it. So in the second stage, equal weights, I think it's a good method.
Sorry, I don't think I got the difference between first and second stage.
Okay, well-being is a composite index of well-being, can have different domains: housing, health, education, etc. Inside each domain, the variables are aggregated inside. For example, we will have the index of housing. Then all these domains of well-being are aggregated in the synthetic index.
Okay, so the first stage is within a topic, and the second one is across topics. Is that it?
Yes.
Okay, nice. Yeah, you could use those words because it will help people. The other thing is, I mean, this subjectivity that you seem to downplay as a drawback. To me, it's exactly the opposite. I mean, you would want to capture people's preferences, and preferences are heterogeneous, and I mean, of course they are subjective, they are preferences. And you want to capture that.
Yeah, in fact, it's not my opinion. I mean, it's what some authors say about this. I mean, it's why some authors justify that subjectivity is a problem, you know, so...
No, I understand, but... Anyway.
Okay, yes. In fact, the OCDE justifies that subjectivity is really important.
Exactly.
So, I mean, it depends on the concept. It's for that I say that there are approaches, that it depends many times of what the author wants. Okay. Rapidly, most of the indices follow easy interpretation from 0 to 1, 0 to 10, or 0 to 100. And there's huge differences in the number of indicators included. 9 of the indices have from 2 to 6 variables, 7 around 20, 25, and 4 have more than 50 variables. Okay, we can continue with empirical analysis. I have to comment some methodological issues. The first is that I include 38 more developed countries. Then I did the average of the scores from 2013 to 2018 in order to have greater robustness. Then scores are normalized with a Mixmer formula. And finally, I assign equal weights to the domains of the better life index in order to be able to include an analysis. Then some histograms to see that there are some outliers. Okay, at the beginning is the distribution, so there are some outlier in the bottom of the distribution, and we can see this long tail on the left, and most of the variable and most of the countries, sorry, in these two indices are concentrated on the left. Here we can see the top and bottom countries. It's what they said, South Africa is the outlier that appeared in the other graphs, and for most of the indices it is the worst performer. On the other hand, we have Norway, that is the leader in 4 of the indices. An interesting case is Colombia, because generally don't have good results, but if we see the 2 last columns, which is the Sustainable Development Index and the Happy Planet Index, is the best performer of the sample. There's a justification for this, and it's because these 2 indices consider sustainability as an important conceptual part of the index, and it then changes the results. Here there's a correlation matrix, and we can see how all of them are more related, but these 2 last has different. For example, Happy Planet Index, like no correlation, and the last negative correlation. So we can appreciate that sustainability maybe should be assessed separately from social well-being, because they are completely different things. Also, the 2 first variables are the GDP and happiness. And we can see that all of the indices, except this one, the Happy Planet Index, all of them are more related to GDP than to happiness by construction. So it means that economic variables by construction has a huge weight inside the indices. Then some concluding remarks. Just social well-being composite index mainly follow a top-down selection method. Then both subjective and objective conditions provide different and complementary information. Most of the analyzed indices still use both outputs and instruments, especially economic variables. Most of them are more related to GDP than happiness. Then most present similar results, except those that focus on environment. And then environment sustainability differs from social well-being. And different methodological techniques may not make a difference in scores. But next steps, because I have to finish this last part, I want to explore more the potential differences on scores depending on conceptual approaches and methodological decisions. For example, doing some progressions, and I want to analyze the contribution of domains on well-being, and analyze the correlations among domains of the same index, and correlations of similar domains of different indices. And that's all. Thank you for your attention. If you have any question or suggestion, they're welcome.
Thank you, Eric, for your presentation, comments, suggestions.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'll wrap up with
Oh.
extra comment and then pass it on. No, so I think it's super interesting. I would suggest you to pursue more the subjective approach. I'll send you a reference and I'll send it to Ferran. And I mean, it's just very interesting to try to develop more measurement on this fundamental question. I mean, it's removed from my topics too, but lately I've been reading a little bit circumstantially about this. And I mean, there's ways that you could sort of gather information on this subjective preference that people have and then sort of aggregate them meaningfully, which is I think what you want to do. So, I mean,
just a comment on this subjectivity, objectivity. You have to distinguish between measurement and preferences. On all this literature measuring things, they try to stress the power of subjectivity because you can control what you are measuring. So, for instance, you can ask about what's the quality of your health, and that the response will depend on whatever cultural or how it's your environment look like and so on. So that is very difficult to actually control for. While if you are just using survival rates or I don't know, number of life expectancy or whatever, that is much more. It's much easier to compare and control where all this comes from, and that is why not in well-being, but generally when you measure training or many things at this highly aggregated comparative level, it's usually it's advised. The recommendation is try to just use objective measures. So that is the reason. Not preferences will be that is why he suggested that the weight of the domains and so on can be used with subjectivity, but in terms of measure what you are measuring, it's...
Okay, thank you. There is one question by Christine over there.
Hi, my question is about what is your understanding when we talk about sustainability and environment? Are you using the term synonymously?
I am using what?
Sustainability and environment. Are you using these two terms synonymously?
Well, no. Most of the indicators or the indices that use sustainability, I mean, I just consider if social variables are inside. So some of them talk about sustainability. But what I say that it's different is that environmental sustainability and well-being are different phenomena. So for me, I think sustainability includes everything. I mean, when we talk about sustainability, normally it's the people, planet, and
There are basically three components, right?
yes.
You talk about economic sustainability, environmental sustainability, and social sustainability.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
I did not understand why would you say that social well-being, for that matter, should be separated from sustainability.
I mean, if I want to measure social well-being, and I include environmental aspects.
No, of course, if you want to, measure social well-being, you can always have it as a separate component. But it just felt like you're saying that social well-being is not a component of sustainability. I mean, I could have read it wrong,
Okay.
but it just came across like that. Also, your whole slide on sustainability, that one slide, it just felt like it was more focused on environment. And at one point, it just felt like you're saying that sustainability is equivalent to just environmental sustainability, while it is a much broader term. And that's just.
I will make it clear, but the thing is that there are different concepts. If you want to measure sustainability, for sure you have to consider everything. But if you want to measure just one component, it's a problem to mix everything. Just this.
Okay, thank you. It's a very nice effort to try to compare very different indicators. Some of them using objective measures, some of them using more qualitative data. So, but I guess that I was wondering about which is the end, because at the end, once you have analyzed them, you have compared them, the next stage should be having analyzed it, observed advantages, inconvenience, and the way in which they are related. Perhaps the next stage should be to provide your own, let's say, proposal about a new indicator, trying to taking into account all the positive aspects you have noticed in these 20 different indicators. So perhaps now you have to make a suggestion about a new method having all these quantitative and qualitative dimensions, and then see what happens.
Yeah, it's an interesting point. In fact, my idea is to create one index because in fact there are some considerations that are depending on authors. So I want to make clear that conceptual approaches sometimes depend on what you want, but sometimes there are some problems and problematics that must be betterly addressed. So yeah, my idea is to create one index to afterwards do the research that wanted to relation to other concepts. Yes.
Thank you. So any more questions, comments? No? So thanks, Eric. Thank you very much. And we move to the next presentation by Harris Papadakis.
Okay, hello everyone. My name is Harris Papadakis, and I'm going to present the financial integration since the first era of digitalization. The outline of the presentation is your objectives, introduction, methodology, empirical analysis, and conclusions. The main objective, the aim of the study is to revisit financial integration in global markets during the period from 1870 to 2016. The global financial system is highly interconnected over the last 2 centuries. Financial shocks and important historical events have shaped financial markets and economies worldwide. Also, financial integration is defined and measured in different ways in the literature. Authors Obsfeld and Taylor and O'Rourke and Williamson argue that the great increase in international economic integration came as the pace of international integration in all markets increased excessively after 1870. In our analysis, we introduce a dynamic factor model for evaluating the level of financial and economic integration in 17 countries. Also, we use a dynamic panel approach and we estimate a heterogeneous coefficient model in 6 panels with dependence across sectional units. The estimation methods are the mean group estimator, the common correlated effects estimator, and the dynamic common correlation effects estimator. Finally, we test for cross-sectional dependence. In our methodology, firstly, some theory for dynamic factor approach. Dynamic factor analysis, which is a combination of factor and time series analysis, involves autocorrelation matrices calculated from multivariate time series. Also, dynamic factor models can divide the dataset into a latent common component, which represent the overall cycle conditions, and an individual component, which refers to the particular dynamics of the series. Finally, the Kalman filter is an algorithm that provides estimates of some unknown variables given the measurements observed over time. Our dataset consists of individual YT for I and T, with NT representing the total number of countries and time units respectively. The DMF, the DFM can describe them from the following equations, where in the first equation, F represents the vector of common factor, A is the factor of factor loading or coefficient linking, the common factor of the ith variable, and U is the vector of individual component. For the factor F, we assume an AR process. You can see in the second equation. And finally, the vector of U, the vector of individual component, can be described from the third equation. Now, to estimate the model's parameters and to infer. Okay.
Can I ask a question? But can you go back? But these common factors, this vector of common factors, but they are indexed by country. So.
Yes. Yes. For example, we have 17 countries, and Y is YIT is every country.
But then they're not so common. I mean, it depends on the country. It's country specific.
Yes, but the common factor represented from the FIT.
I think the question is about the notation. So FIT should be FT. Should it be?
Should be FT, no?
Maybe, yes. Maybe
that's the typo.
FT, yes, maybe. It's all right, yeah. Sorry.
Now the loading, the factor loading, that is country specific, right? Because that might affect the countries differently, yeah?
Yes, all right. Okay. Okay, to estimate the model's parameters and to infer unobserved components by using the Kalman filter, it is convenient to rewrite the equations that describe the model's parameters in a dynamic state space representation. In the case of n countries, which are collected in the vector YT, the state space form is represented from the measurement equation and the prediction equation, and the state space representation is given by the matrices equation are following: the first equation and the second one. Now, in the dynamic panel approach, in the second approach in our study, the common correlated effects estimator works by augmenting the model by cross-sectional averages of the dependent variable, and the regression resolver to account for the common factors and adding individual intercepts and possible threats. Now we assume the following equation with heterogeneous coefficients, and this equation describes the CCE estimator, where FT is an unobserved common factor, gamma is an heterogeneous factor loading, and AI a country-specific fixed effect. Also, the next equation is the dynamic form of common correlated effect estimator. And now in our empirical analysis, firstly, to investigate the financial integration in global markets, we use financial and macroeconomic variables. We build datasets on real interest rates, equities, bonds, and GDP to measure the common dynamics across 17 countries. The same period starts from 1870 to 2016 and is split in two periods from 1870 to 1913. Is well known as first era of globalization, and the second one is from 1950 to 2016 and includes Bretton Woods monetary system period and floating exchange rates period. Finally, we use annual data for the following countries, or 17 countries from all over the world. While in the, yes?
There is no data for in between because of the world wars, I guess, no?
Yes, the data is only for every country. And in the second approach, to examine the dynamic panel model, we employ 6 panels of annual data. We build panel data sets on real interest rates, equities, bonds, inflation, debt to GDP ratio, equity dividend yield, and the estimated common factor from the dynamic factor approach. The dependent variables are real interest rates, equities, and bonds, while the others are used as independent variables in the lagged form 1. Now, numerical results of dynamic factor model. In the table 1, we can see the results from real interest rates for 16 countries over 2 estimation periods. In the first period, we can see that we are focused on the column of share of common variance, and we can see that the UK, as a leading economic country, as well as Norway and Sweden of small open economic countries, has the higher share of common variance. The common variance, in order to understand for an example, for example, if the UK, the share of common variance for the UK, this means that the variance of the UK explains in 68% the variance of estimated common factor. And in this way, the Sweden with 53% explains the variance of the estimated common factor, etc. In the second period, the most important countries are the USA, Canada, and Australia. And we can see these results in plots in figure 1. In figures, we plot the common factor and the 3 most significant countries in each period. And in the first period, the UK, Sweden, and Norway are the most important countries. And in the second period, USA, Australia, and Canada are the most important countries. Now in the second table, the results for equities, UK and Germany as leading economic countries, and Sweden having an open financial markets are the most important countries, while in the second period, France, Sweden, and Belgium are very significant countries, as you can see. The same information you can see in the figure 2, we have plotted the countries UK, Sweden and Germany in the first period, and France, Sweden and Belgium in the second period. In the same way, in the bond market, the share of common variance of Germany is the most important result in the first period, with 81% share of common variance. And this you can see in the figure 3. And other countries like Sweden and Norway in the first period are very important, while in the second period, Sweden, France and Australia are also very significant countries. Finally, the results from GDP. In the first period, Canada, USA and the UK are the countries with the higher share of common variance, while in the second period, France, Belgium and Netherlands are the most important countries in GDP. The same results in the plot 1 and plot 2. And now the empirical results from a dynamic panel approach. The table 5 provides a correlation among the dependent variable and the dependent variables during the estimation periods. As the dependent variable is the real interest rate, while in dependent variables the real interest rate, inflation, debt to GDP and common factor in lag form 1. Here you can see the 3 methods we used, and the method we took the most important results is the dynamic common correlated effects in the third column for each period, where inflation and the real interest rate has a positive effect in the dependent variable in the first period, while in the second period only real interest rate lag 1 has a positive effect for real interest rate. Also, the cross-sectional correlation increases in the second period, implying that financial integration increases. In the table 6, we have as a dependent variable the bond, and as explanatory variables, the bond inflation, debt to GDP, and common factor in lag 1 form. Here in the second period, inflation lag 1 has a positive effect within 3 methods, and bond lag 1 has a negative effect on bonds, on dependent variable. Also, the cross-sectional correlation in the second period is higher than in the first period, and that means that we have a higher financial integration in the second period. And in the last table, with a dependent variable equity market and explanatory variables equity, inflation, equity dividend yield, and common factor in lag form 1. The most important results here is that equity dividend lag has a positive effect in the second period, which is according to the fundamental. And finally, and here the cross-sectional correlation is higher in the second period. Now to conclude, the great increase of financial integration is in period 1950 to 2016. Also, some Scandinavian countries, being small open economies, had an open financial markets. And finally, the equity dividend ratio had a positive effect on the equity markets in the period 1950 to 2016, while it did not affect the markets in the first period. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Comments, questions? Susana, over there.
So let's take everything I say with a grain of salt because I have no idea of the models, right? But I wonder whether it is possible to put a little bit more structure into the model and I wonder, does it work?
Okay,
yeah.
yes, yes.
I wonder whether it is possible to put a little bit more structure within the models and, for example, allow for specific countries to have a higher integration between them. Because, like, for example, you know, the UK has colonial ties with Australia, Canada, you know, all that stuff, and that would be important, supposedly, at least in the first wave of globalization, right? So, you know, doing the same estimation, but allowing for like a different level of integration for some subsets of countries. That's one comment. And then the other common question is, so the estimations, if I understood it correctly, you do the estimations separately for the first globalization wave and for the second.
Yes,
yeah?
yes.
So again, I don't know whether it would make sense to try to do it like all the years combined and kind of have allow for some structural breaks in that years. We'll be talking about structural breaks lately, that's why so that the second globalization wave is deeper. You know what I mean? So yes, you know, do the panel and the time series, but for the two periods, but allowing for some structural break from the first to the second. I don't know if that makes sense at all. Or in a way you are already getting that, because I don't know how comparable the results are from one globalization wave to the other.
Okay, thank you for your recommendations. For the first one, you are right. Maybe we can focus on the relationship between countries and to estimate how integrated was some financial or economic markets, for example, between USA and the UK in the first period or in the second period. It's something interesting. Okay, yes. In the second one, yes, we estimated the financial integration in two different periods, but I don't know if we can combine the results in two periods. It's something I have to look for. But it's something interesting to search it.
Thinking out loud, I was wondering if the type of factor that Pharma French use could make sense in this environment, because in the end they're trying to capture some macro factors, not related to risk and whatnot. So I mean, just
yes. Yes, we use some variables, for example, real interest rates and GDP as macroeconomic variables, and equities and bonds as financial variables. But yes, maybe you can use more variables.
I guess the pharma, just on your point, actually, I guess the pharma French factor. One is the stock market premium, right, which is the primary variable here. The other one is the small to big premium, and the third one is the
high to market versus low.
So I guess the context here is different.
Yeah.
Right? So you would put forward the pharma French regression when you have different different stocks, right, or portfolios. But in this case, his dependent variable is the stock market, the equity market, right? It's not that you have it's quite aggregated, right? It's different countries, across countries, but it's quite aggregated.
I mean,
I'm not sure, but I
get what you're saying. I suppose my logic was, if pharma friends are trying to capture macro factors at a given point in time, sure, it's about the cross-section, but it's a macro factor. That should be, but of course I understand that the dependent is one of their factors, so I wouldn't use the same. But yeah, so, yeah.
Okay, thank you.
In line with more or less with Susana, but I point that probably you can introduce some kind of qualitative variable in the sense that there's a research line between the relationship between law and finance. There are several papers by Rafael Laporta and López de Selanes, and they relate the financial development on different legal systems, the common law, the French law, and the Scandinavian German, and so on. And probably you can add, probably, I don't know exactly, you can add in your model like a dummy variable for different systems that could affect the integration. Yes, you can look at this paper because these are more related on corporate finance, really. Yes, but probably you can in some way translate this into your domain.
Yes, yes, you're right. It's something we can read. Yes, thanks.
Okay, thank you. Apart from all these technicalities you have been suggested, let me suggest for the next presentation to try to from the very beginning to sell your contribution. So identify one topic, but I think that you have to emphasize how you are contributing, and then also when at the second part of your presentation, when explaining your results, I even may suggest to decode your results rather than to explain them, because otherwise, if your audience is not familiar with this kind of methodology literature, it's better if you try to explain so how well the way in which these results are contributing to your story in that sense. But thank you very much, Harris, for your presentation. So with your presentation, we finish this part of PhD students. So now we go to Susana, which is a senior researcher, and Susana will close this fourth edition of the doctorals with a presentation about the entrepreneurial choice.
Okay.
Agafa el...
Que m'ho agafi així?
Sí, sí, sí.
No?
Bueno, és que estan a casa.
Vale. Okay, 2 minutes means the micro and this. Okay, so how much time do I have? 20 minutes? Or should I make even shorter?
because I think we are running late.
20 minutes is fine. Yeah.
Okay, okay. All right, so I'm not gonna present really a paper, but I did more this talk as a kind of state of the art or a bit of more of a bunch of papers on this topic, which is quite huge, the entrepreneurship choice. Okay, so let me tell you a little bit what my plan is. So I wanna walk you through the paper in entrepreneurship, which is the seminal paper by Lucas, 1978, and then I wanna go through some modifications of that basic paper. Okay. Some of them I will do them with a little more formality, like when I talk about financial constraints, but some others I'm just gonna wave my hands on them, right? But I will talk about uncertainty as well, learning, and then minor entrepreneurs. I have a paper here, so here I will also be a little bit more detailed. And then I'll tell you a little bit how this model has been taken to the data, to the micro data, okay? Because there's also a lot of testable hypotheses that have been taken to match moments in macro data, okay? All right, so let me tell you a little bit about the Lucas model. And also I wanna start with a disclaimer. The notation is different, and I have also made a couple of modifications from the original paper, but it's essentially Lucas model. So we have an economy where we have people, we have individuals with different skill levels, Z, okay, drawn from a distribution function gamma with support underscore Z, upper score Z, okay, and a cumulative distribution function capital gamma, all right? Now, these people might become entrepreneurs, or they might work for somebody else, okay? They might become entrepreneurs, or they might become employees working for somebody else, okay? Now, entrepreneurial ability, that I'm going to call A, will depend on general skills, Z, and also on specific entrepreneurial attributes, right? So we know also that attitude towards risk, ambitious, things like that are also very important to become an entrepreneur, okay? So these are other attributes that I'm not gonna they're not gonna be explicitly modeled here, but they will also affect ability, entrepreneurial ability, okay? And you know, we have these properties for this entrepreneurial ability. If you have 0 skills, then your entrepreneurial ability is also 0, and the first derivative is positive, okay? Now, output is going to be produced according to this production function, where basically, this production function here, where basically we have constant returns to scale on labor and capital, okay? So you hire workers, you also invest in capital, and you produce some output, all right? Then there's going to be another a concave transformation of this production function. This G is just a transformation of this production function, which is concave, and that's just to prevent the most capable, the person with the highest ability to hire all the workers and all the capital, okay? So that's what Lucas called the span of control, okay? All the capital and all the labor is not accumulated in just one person, because there are diminishing returns to that, okay? And so in the output, the other important element is the ability, entrepreneurial ability, all right? Which enters multiplicatively here. So here we have our first remark. Notice that more capable entrepreneurs, individuals with more entrepreneurial ability, are those who extract more output, who can get more output, more total factor productivity, as we call it in economics, okay? The second remark I already told you, because this is a concave transformation that basically prevents all the labor and all the capital from being just managed by one person, okay? That's the span of control, all right? Okay, and then we have some other technicalities here that are not, I don't want to
I understand you guys, most of you are not in the economics department, so I don't want to bore you too much. But basically, we can rewrite the production function like this. We can take out labor because the cost of returns to scale in this function F here. That's useful. Okay, so then someone who thinks of becoming an entrepreneur will find that his profits as an entrepreneur will just be the output it gets from this entrepreneurial activity, which is this guy here, okay, minus the wages that he has to pay, right? So the wages that he pays to the workers that he will hire, minus the return that he has to pay on the capital that he also invested on. All right, so those are profits, entrepreneurial profits. All right. Now, the problem of the would-be entrepreneur would be to maximize these profits, right? Okay. So we set up this optimization problem of maximizing profits, right? So finding the capital and the labor, the capital that I have to invest in, and the labor that I need to hire in order to maximize my profits, okay? Well, from this maximization problem, we get these first order conditions, and the solutions are the factor demand functions, okay? So the demand for labor and the demand for capital. That notice they will depend on what my entrepreneurial ability is, okay? All right, and these derivatives are positive. Notice that what that means is that more capable entrepreneurs, right, individuals that have higher entrepreneurial ability will also demand more labor, will hire more people, okay? And the same for the capital, right? More capable individuals will also want to invest more in capital, all right? Okay, so if we then plug in these optimal factor demand functions back into the entrepreneur profit functions, right? We have that the optimal profits for an entrepreneur is this guy here, all right? And it can be shown, it shows that basically this profit function, where they are already the optimal amounts of capital and labor, this profit function is basically convex. That's what this means. It is a convex function. I'll have a picture in a couple of slides where you will see clearly. Okay? All right. So that is if the individual becomes an entrepreneur. Alternatively, the individual can work for somebody else. Can become an employee working for a wage for somebody else. Okay? If he does so, then I jumped one slide. If he does so, then he's going to get a wage, which will also depend on his skill, what his skill level is, okay? In this simple linear way, all right? Here, that's not, I mean, I have given some structure, it's not like that exactly in the Lucas Virgili paper, but it goes without, I mean, it's not, I'm not doing anything, I'm not changing anything major here, okay? And finally, let me also introduce one more piece. We can also think of entrepreneurship as entailing costs other than the investment in capital. For example, I have to pay a fee to register my business, or I have to incur in bureaucratic paperwork, right? All that might entail some cost, some fixed cost, okay? So I'm gonna call that big C, all right? So really, the net entrepreneurship profits will be the profits minus this cost C, okay? All right? And if I become, instead of an employee working for somebody else, I'm gonna get this, all right? Okay? So then naturally, the choice of whether becoming an entrepreneur or not depends on how these net profits compare to the wage earnings that I will make. Okay? So if this is greater than this, then I will become an entrepreneur and the other way around. Alright? Well, let me show you the pictures and then I'll discuss this one. So basically here I have the pictures for the entrepreneurship profit function, net, so I have already subtracted this potential C, fixed cost, and this is the wage function. All product against skills, individual skills, okay? So notice that the important thing here is that in Lucas' model is a clear threshold model in the sense that individuals with the skill levels below some threshold, in this case is big S, these guys will be employees working for somebody else, whereas people with the skill levels above this big S will become entrepreneurs, right? That's the main prediction of the Lucas model, okay? Also from this picture, I guess it's quite clear that we can also, it can also be easily computed, we can also easily compute the average entrepreneurship skill, which is, mathematically, is this guys here, is the expected skill conditional on me being an entrepreneur, okay? So it's basically the area, the integral of skills from the marginal entrepreneur, the guy that just is indifferent, to the guy with the higher skill, okay, divided by, essentially, by the mass of entrepreneurs, okay? All right, so that's basically Lucas' model, all right? So now I'm gonna